everyone. Welcome to February's Ask a Master Food Preserver event. Just to cover a few quick things. We are the Master Food Preserver online delivery program. So we are a community outreach program. We are online only based, grant funded volunteer program of the University of California Cooperative Extension that provides up-to-date research-based information on food safety and preservation. As always, the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are each speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of the University of California. Our mission is to keep Californians and all people safe and well as they use culturally appropriate research-based recipes to safely preserve food in the home, reducing food waste, increasing food security, and providing engaging ways for them to explore healthy foods. Today's event will be a Q&A style event. Please ask your questions, as Travis said, either in the chat via the Q&A or orally. Just start us off with something fun this evening. I just made some citrus marmalade recently for our upcoming Sweet Citrus Spreads event, which will be happening this Sunday at 2 p.m. Please feel free to sign up and attend then. We're also going to be having a live demonstration during that event, which will be a lot of fun.
I will take credit for my wife's work. This is a candied citrus peel. This is a Buddha's hand, or a citron. It's pretty simple. You just boil citrus rinds in sugar syrup, and then roll them in sugar. And also put chocolate on the end of them. They're very tasty and they're kind of addictive. My wife is also a master food preserver. What else are people making? You're muted, Paige.
Oh, I should get that on a tattoo. You're muted, Paige. Maybe not. I didn't. Are we sharing? I walked away for a second.
Yeah,
Had to deal with
yeah,
the
we're
dog
sharing.
issue.
What are we doing?
Yeah, I was just telling him I had gone kind of similar to Henry. I this weekend had an abundance of tangerines and lemons, so I made candied, like little citrus, which are my kids like to eat them, and I like to chop them up and put them in like sweet kind of bread type things or celebration type stuff. Or I like this chopped up. This is lemon. I like to chop it up inside of like a lemon cake or quick breads. So I use them. These will keep for a really, really, really long time in a mason jar. Like usually I have enough that by the time citrus season comes around again, I'm like throwing out last year. So it's still funny.
Awesome.
Anyone have a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Have any of the folks here attended one of our actual teaching events online? Raise your hand if you have, or speak up. It's a shy group.
Your questions don't have to be about citrus. They can be about it.
No.
So
Just
I actually had a question. I do my question's about dehydrating. So I dehydrate for like camping trips, backpack trips, and I'll dehydrate it and then I'll put it in the freezer and then take it out of the freezer right before I go. And so I'm vegetarian, so I don't do any meat at all, but I'm wondering how worried do I need to be about like oil, or like if I saute my vegetables in a little bit of oil, is it going to spoil before I eat it? Or am I good as long as it's dry?
you're dehydrating sauteed, oil sauteed. things.
Yeah, or like if I dehydrated like a marinara sauce that I sauteed the onion in a little bit of olive oil, or vodka pasta where I put a little whipping cream in it. Is there like a time that I could keep it that it wouldn't go rancid? Because I know oil is going to go rancid eventually. Or am I better off just steaming it and then taking that out of the equation?
So the issue for this really is the time from the freezer to when you're consuming it, because again, oils themselves just go rancid. That's why often when things are recommended dehydrating for, especially for things that are for long-term storage, we would normally recommend you try not to use oil. But if you are, but you said you're storing it in the freezer.
So I usually dehydrate it and I'll store it in the freezer and then I'll take it out right before we go. So the longest it would probably be out is like a week, maybe 2 weeks.
Right. So
and I
for
feel like
your
oil doesn't go rancid in 2 weeks. But
you yeah, oil is probably less of an issue, but the dairy product.
So stay away from the
and
dairy.
cream.
Yeah, okay.
Right, because again, you have all of the freezing doesn't kill any potential pathogens in your food. It just stops their activity. It's sort of like
Okay.
putting, if you've ever had like a reptile, you know, when they get cold, they stop moving around.
Right.
Okay. So just because you've frozen it, it's sort of suspended animation, if you will. So once it comes back to temperature, so when you take it out and it goes into your backpack or your camp kitchen, anything that might be in there now is going to, wake up and come back to life. Now, vegetable oils typically are not a source of pathogens.
Okay.
So, but they can go rancid. So that's an issue. But dairy products, on the other hand, can be. And there are, things like listeria and other things that can grow in dairy products.
And that's even if I boil them before I dehydrate them.
Right.
If I bring it up to
Well,
boil before I dehydrate it, does that negate anything or not really, just stay away from it?
I'd worry about post boiling, post dehydration contamination of the material.
Yeah,
too.
because
So
you're also
you can't
providing
guarantee
food.
that you're not handling it in a sterile environment
Right,
once you take it out of the dehydrator.
Right,
So-
right. Okay.
But something you might want to think about is keep in mind that you can, and I know there's an additional expense, but you can purchase things like freeze dried, like cream powder, which you could add at the point at which you rehydrate. So you would keep those as a separate. So you could make like you could dehydrate like a marinara, and if you wanted to turn it into a creamy marinara, you could, at the point at which you're rehydrating it, add something like powdered cream.
Okay.
And powdered cream you can purchase commercially, because it does have to be, that's not the sort of thing one makes at home without a lot of very specialized equipment.
It's probably freeze
So we
dried,
recommend it.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah, and then even then, this, the sterile, all that, but you can purchase that stuff pretty, and it's got a pretty long shelf life.
Okay.
And then you could just toss that in at the time. But I would not dehydrate things that have dairy in them, because again, whatever is in it, and keep in mind too that often what makes us ill is not the bacteria, but the bacteria or the pathogens waste, which is still there.
Okay.
So even if you've boiled it, so I would definitely stay away from the dairy. Vegetable oils, again, if you're storing it in the freezer, it's gonna, take a very long time for it to go rancid in the freezer. And then if you're only keeping it out for a week or so, that's not enough time. It's highly unlikely, unless it was in, on the dashboard in the hot sun.
Really hot. Yeah. Depends on the time temperature.
You're like in Death Valley, so don't do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Hopefully we answered your question.
Thank you.
Very quiet group tonight.
I don't have a microphone hooked up to my laptop. Can you hear me?
Yep. Hear you fine.
Okay. I enjoy cucumbers a lot, but my wife and I both don't like pickles. And last year we tried dehydrating cucumbers and they because we've done it like with apples and other fruit, and they turned out tasting just like pickles, so it was not very enjoyable. So I'm wondering if you have any ways to preserve cucumbers that would keep them like a cucumber.
Did you put vinegar on them or salt on them before you dehydrated them? Because you can make cucumber chips with basically no seasoning on them
I
just by
think
dehydrating.
yeah, I don't think I put any seasoning on them or anything, but they just came out with the essence of a pickle taste in them. Did I
Are
do something
you
wrong? Did
feeling like it's kind of, is it like a cooked flavor that's coming through? Possibly, since
Um,
most pickles are cooked.
oh yeah, yeah,
Not fermented ones necessarily.
Yeah. But anything that's like shelf stable or heat processed is going to be cooked.
okay,
And dehydrating does put some heat into it. So that probably does change the flavor a little bit. I'm not sure what temperature or time you were dehydrating that specifically, and I don't know the specific temperatures for cucumbers off the top of my head. But
maybe if I did it at a lower temperature, it wouldn't be so bad.
possibly, what are you using the cucumbers in? Are you just eating them straight?
We were trying to make cucumber chips,
I
and
see.
I don't remember exactly. We might have tried different spices on them, you know, like salt or pepper or something like that. But maybe
Yeah,
just try a lower temperature.
Yeah.
possibly.
Lower,
That's the only thing I can think of. Other than that, the only other preservation method that's basically cooking free is going to be freezing, which is going to substantially change the texture of the cucumbers.
Right. Yeah, I figured that. Okay. All right. Well, I thought I'd ask. Thank
Sorry,
you.
we couldn't be more helpful.
try something like 120, 125 degrees C or F Fahrenheit for your temperature.
Okay.
Sorry,
Okay.
this is Kirsten, the MFP and chat monitor coming in and letting y'all know that we have another question, but also for Rich, I'm wondering if some of that pickly flavor is coming from having salted the cucumbers. So I would either trying to do a dehydration at a lower temperature without salting the cucumbers, or if you wanted to get a jump start on taking some of the water out of them, you could sprinkle them with salt and then make sure that you either blot it all off or rinse it. That might be where some of that pickly flavor is coming from, even without vinegar.
Okay,
Um,
I did 100% understand that last one. Using salt to preserve it before I
So, so sometimes salt can act to draw water out. So if you did want to salt your cucumbers before putting them in the dehydrator, but wanted less of a pickle flavor, you could then just take a paper towel and blot them before putting them in the dehydrator to get the salt off, or even rinse them off.
Okay.
And we also have another MFP chatting in to say that you could also blanch the cucumber slices, which might be a good option as well, which is basically putting them in hot water very briefly and then ice water. And then our next question for our MFPs from Patty is, what's the best way to preserve nut butters? This is a nice continuation of things with fat in them and preservation of those things.
Yeah. So nut butters, honestly, the best way to do it at home is probably to freeze them to prevent them from going rancid. They do last a while in the fridge, but if you want long-term storage, freezing is going to be your best bet.
And try and reduce the exposure to oxygen, basically, so you don't have a lot of headspace in your jar. Put them in a tightly sealed bag or a full thing. So rancidity is caused by oxygen reacting with the fats and making byproducts. temperature, obviously, at higher temperatures, that reaction goes faster. So keeping them as cold as possible and reducing exposure to the air are the two key features, things that you should do.
When I have frozen nut butter, that same thing, I like to do it in fairly small jars so that when I'm ready to take it out, I don't have to defrost like a 10 ounce or a 12 ounce jar, but maybe you can buy like 4-ounce canning jars or even 8-ounce. And the other one, back to Henry's point, is I will take a small piece of either parchment or plastic wrap and put it on the surface so it's touching the surface of it before I screw the lid on, just to even reduce the contact with the air to, that's trapped in the jar, just to help minimize that. And then like I said, I like to do it in a smaller container so that when I do take it out and put it in the fridge to defrost, and you do want to defrost it in the fridge, I just don't have quite so much all of a sudden. Yeah, nuts are tough because they contain all those great oils that go rancid pretty quickly.
Who among our attendees have experienced doing dehydrating? Raise your hands. Nobody. Yes. Do you know how to raise your hands? You go to or thumbs up, you can go to react. Cool. So we have people who do stuff. What do people dehydrate?
Oh, and Cheyenne, if you had a question with your
Oh, you
raised
have it.
hand, feel free to ask it. If you were just raising your hand to let us dehydrate, so excited. We love dehydration. And I will, this again is Kirsten. I'll throw a question out to our MFPs. I'm wondering, with all this chat about dehydration, has anyone here ever tried to do peanut butter powder? Because I see it in the store all the time, and it's sort of sold as like a protein addition or something that you can bring backpacking and then add the oil afterwards. Um, but I'm wondering if it's something that can be done at home or if you really sort of need manufacturing level equipment for it.
It's actually freeze dried.
Oh, thank you, Paige.
Yeah, because again, all that fat, so it's freeze
Fat,
dried.
yeah.
Although back to sort of backpacking and things, peanut butter powder, again, you need to purchase it, but it is it's super handy.
Yeah.
Is it, I'm not familiar with it. Is it defatted before they dehydrate it?
No, it still contains, it's not as fat. It doesn't have as much fat as sort of
Peanuts.
Regular peanut butter, and you rehydrate it with water, but it does still have fat in it. It doesn't last forever, but it does have a long shelf life. It's actually, again, it's great to add extra peanut to things. I throw it in like in my kids' smoothies just to add additional protein, and it tastes good. There are a number of commercial, but you can buy it actually in grocery stores in the peanut butter aisle, and like sort of better stocked grocery stores will carry it. But yeah, it's actually freeze dried. It's one of those things.
But we've mentioned freeze drying, and actually there are now home freeze drying units. They're not cheap. They're like $3,000, and they take
2,000. You can get one for 2,000 now. They brought
now,
it. They've
okay,
made a.
now.
They yeah. What is it? That company. There's like one company that kind of makes the home versions right now in the U.S. anyway, and
they've got competitors now too.
Yeah, they've generously brought out a slightly smaller one. I will tell you though that if freeze drying is something that's interesting to you, there are a number of products that you'll see for sale that are labeled as freeze dryers, and if you read the descriptions, they're clearly dehydrators. Home freeze dryers are in the thousands of dollars. So if it's for $140, it's likely
it's a dehydrator.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. Nina.
Nina raised her hand, but we also have a question from Cheyenne in the chat. So Nina, go ahead, and then Cheyenne will answer your question about drying fruit.
Hi, sorry, I'm maneuvering around here, but I do have one of our MFP Bibles here, and it says for peanuts, you could dry them at 130 degrees, and they should be brittle by the time they're done. So, but not shriveled up. So anyway, there's a thought, and it also gives instructions for how to roast them in the 300-degree oven for 30 or 40 minutes. And this is laying them out on a cookie sheet, you know. So I suppose if she did that, then you could grind it up into a powder, but probably I'd store it in the freezer because nuts have some association with bacterial growth. So I would be a little cautious about storing them long-term at room temperature.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So let's see here. So the first question we have from Cheyenne is the sliced fruit that she does comes out chewy no matter how long. They leave it in the dehydrator. Is this typical with dehydration? And they're hoping for more of a crunchy texture. And Elena noted that dehydrating at a higher temperature tends to give a crunchy result, but I'd love to hear if our other MFPs have input. And then we do have another question after that.
Higher temperature will drive out more water. You'll get the activity of water in the product will be lower. To get really crunchy stuff, the really crunchy stuff you get in the store is actually freeze dried because it really removes almost all the water. Anything that has sugar in it is also going to be hygroscopic. That is going to attract water from the air and will basically rehydrate to some extent. And you're going to end up with a pliable, chewy product.
Also, sometimes the commercial products you purchase, like banana chips, are either actually
fried
baked or fried.
Yeah.
And the process of deep frying obviously drives out the water. So it's hard to get those same results at home because you're not introducing either deep frying or freeze drying. But again, like Henry said, that if you do it at a slightly higher temperature for a little longer, you'll get that crispier texture.
Also, you can store, you want to put a jar, a bottle with a tight cap, and you can put in a food safe desiccant silica gel that will keep, it'll attract the water and help keep your product crisper, drier.
And our next question, which is a great one from Sarah, is how is food safe when it's dehydrated under 140 degrees? Thanks, Sarah.
Do you want to take that one, Henry, or would you like me to?
Go ahead. We can tag team.
It's a super good question. Part of it is that the process of dehydrating is driving out the water, and removing moisture moisture is one of the factors that promotes the growth of molds, pathogens, things like that. Most things need some sort of moisture. And so the act of dehydrating is actually when you remove the water, you're also you're changing the environment in the food. So it's just less attractive to the bad actors, if you will. So that's why with dehydrating, because you're even though you're not getting it really hot, you are creating an environment that is inhospitable to those things. But that said, it's a really good question. And it's also why it's important, even when you're using things like fruits and vegetables, to make sure you're using clean dehydrator, clean hands, that you wash fruit. We don't think about it, but you need to make sure you're washing the outside of the fruit even before you peel it, if you're going to, let's say, remove the peel, because if you're driving a knife through an apple that's dirty on the outside, you're just driving that into the inside, right? So you still want to make sure you're using good food safe good food handling practices, but the act of dehydrating in itself helps to prevent the growth of molds, pathogens, etc.
And obviously, how long it takes to dehydrate makes a big difference. You wouldn't want to make beef jerky out of inch-thick slabs of beef, and try and do that at under 140 degrees because it's going to rot. It's going to go bad. Similarly, you want to cut your vegetables or fruits. fairly thinly so that they dehydrate quickly, so that you can remove water quickly, so they don't spend enough, very much time in what's called the danger zone. And Sarah asked specifically about 140 degrees. We consider the temperature range between 40 degrees and 140 degrees Fahrenheit as, quote, the danger zone. You don't want to leave food out at those temperatures you want to do it for as little as possible, but 2 hours is sort of the thumb, rule of thumb guideline.
So did that answer your question, Sarah?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
The faster you can get your food dry, the safer it is, basically.
So I recently made some homemade dog treats. So I was using chicken in my dehydrator. And so I did have to make sure I was fairly quick and kept it nice and cold while I was sort of slicing it and pounding it thin. It goes in the dehydrator, and then you're dehydrating it actually a fairly high heat for a dehydrator quickly so that it happens. So the reason that I would, for human consumption, you would never leave chicken out for 4 hours and then eat it, right? And not for the dog either, to be honest with you. But the act of the dehydrating is sort of giving us that little bit of extra time. So it's the dehydrator is driving out the moisture, which is making it a less hospitable environment for things like salmonella and et cetera to grow on the chicken. But even then, so this chicken is dehydrated, it's nice and dry, but even then I'm still storing it in my refrigerator. So it's not, I've not made it shelf stable. And the dog really likes it. So make your own dog.
That's a really good insight, because I always thought when you dehydrated at home, you were making it shelf stable. And clearly that's really not the case always.
Well, and again, it depends. And that's why, we talk a lot with MFPs about using tested recipes, because for some things, like for example, if you're making, let's say, beef jerky, it's a combination of things. It's the solution that you're soaking it in that's full of salt, which is also creating an environment that's inhospitable to certain molds and bacteria. You're driving the heat, the water out, which makes it inhospitable. And the recipes will tell you things like how thick your meat should be, how long, at what temperature, and that's all because it's been tested to know that this is going to be safe for consumption. And then a good recipe will also tell you how long you can keep it, and then you're putting it into an airtight container. So that's kind of why that with MFPs, our constant tested recipes are for exactly situations like this. Is that beef jerky seems like such a, you're like, oh yeah, beef jerky, what's the big deal? It's like, well, it's not a big deal as long as you follow the rules. Because it's a combination of all those things that make it safe, that make it so that it is something you can take camping and maybe not keep in a refrigerator for, not, I wouldn't, years maybe, but certainly the time it takes you to go camping, but it's following all of those directions. And that's again why we always push the using a tested recipe. Because I think about like many of you, my dad used to make beef jerky, and I think he just was doing whatever he wanted. And luckily no one got sick, but it's a little like jaywalking. Like I didn't get hit by a car today, but that doesn't mean it was a good idea. And it was certainly, it could have really gone wrong at any time. We never really thought about it. So anyway, yeah, that's why. So it's not that it's not stable, but you just need to make sure you're following a tested recipe. So for example, when I mentioned the dog treats, because it's for a dog, it doesn't contain any salt. There's no sugar. So there's nothing that's going to absorb moisture, that's going to act as a preservative in it. And that's why it has to stay in a refrigerator. If I was going to be making a jerky, for example, for human consumption, I would follow a tested recipe that's, literally somebody's gone into a lab and made sure that if you follow this, you're making something that is a safe product for you to consume. And when in doubt, put it in the fridge.
Or freezer. And if you're making beef jerky, following along our theme of rancidity, you want to use lean meat because the fats in it go rancid.
Scared everybody away from beef jerky. So for those of you who are here, obviously you're interested in this. Is there anything in particular you wanted to like always wanted to try to preserve or make and either not sure how to go about it or want someone else to try it first? Or I know I was really afraid of pressure canning for a long time, until I had somebody who knew what they were doing sort of to hold my hand through it. Because I was like, there was a little, even though I've used a pressure cooker for years, there's something about a pressure canner that had me convinced I was going to blow up my house, which is really difficult to do, by the way. You'd have to really go out of your way to make that happen. But I don't know if
unless you're using an old pressure canner.
Yeah.
Without the modern safety features that are.
Oh no, the new ones are great. It's so easy. It was pressure canning. If you haven't tried it, is one of those things that I was really afraid of. And I've been canning and dehydrating for many, many years. And I was really afraid of it. And then when I did it, it was like, I do not know what my problem was. My house just popped. But it was one of those things where I was pleasantly surprised at how easy it was, and the things you can at home with a pressure canner. It's such a time and money saver. I was really happy that I got over my fear, my phobia.
Can you kind of summarize that? Because I know my wife and I have not done any pressure canning or anything, and we're not really sure what you can right? We do fruit and jams and things like that, but what can you do with a pressure cooker that you can't do with a water bath canner?
That is a really good question.
Good question.
Really good question. So here's the thing, is that water bath canning and steam canning, and Elena and Henry, feel free to jump in, are appropriate for things that are high acid. So high acid foods, and most fruits, not all fruits, but most fruits are either high acid already, or we have the addition of lemon juice. So often when you make, for example, jelly, the recipes will tell you add X amount of lemon juice.
Yeah.
And the reason
is
because they're trying
jump off on that page. Mm-hmm. A lot of the time for jams and jellies, the lemon juice is also to get the pectin to gel, not just for added acidity. The added acidity is especially important for tomatoes, which are like right on the border of acid or high acid or low acid, right? So we always have to acidify those no matter what, right? Yeah. And interestingly, a lot of tomato recipes, especially from like the National Center for Home Food Preservation, have both pressure canning and water bath canning directions. Both of them still have to be acidified. The processing for the pressure canning is timed so that it matches with the acidified tomatoes. It's not for unacidified tomatoes. I get that question a lot. So I wanted to highlight it. But yeah, sorry to interrupt, Paige.
No, that's really good. I'm glad you said that. So with a pressure canner, you can use to make shelf stable low acid foods. So things like meat, or like I have currently in my pantry turkey stock from my turkey at Thanksgiving. I made turkey stock and I pressure canned it. So now it's shelf stable and I can have it in my pantry. Beans. Before you guys came on, I was commenting my husband brought home too much butternut squash. So I pressure canned that because the squash is low acid. It's not safe to do it in a water bath canner. You're not creating, the water bath canner doesn't get hot enough to prevent the growth, to kill off anything and prevent the growth of new pathogens. So that things that thrive in lots, and it gets more complicated in lots, but that's the bottom line is that the pressure canner is for things that are low acid. So meat.
Just to break in about why the low acid is important. Sorry, Paige.
Yeah,
so the thing about canning is that you are creating an anaerobic environment. So that's inviting pathogens like C. botulinum, which is what causes botulism poisoning. So there are a few ways that we can control that particular pathogen. And in canning, we typically rely on one of two factors. So either high acidity, which prevents the spores from basically becoming active and creating the toxin that can make us sick. And then, so that's why we can can high acid foods in a boiling water bath, which is hitting 212 Fahrenheit, right? Then for low acid foods, when we don't have that controlling acidity factor, we have to go out of our way to actually destroy those spores fully. And that means that we have to take it all the way up to 240 Fahrenheit. And we can't do that at atmospheric pressure because water boils at 212. So we have to put it under pressure in order for that temperature to get high enough to actually kill off those spores that could make us sick. So that's the really important pathogen for canning. A lot of the time you are killing off a whole bunch of other pathogens. It's not just that one, but this is why
It's
we have
Clostridium
high
botulinum.
acid and low acid. Thank you, Henry.
And then to your
And
question,
and
Rich, so
the organism itself will die in a boiling water canner, but it's a resistant little bug. And if it thinks it's in danger, it will make things called spores, which are very resistant to temperature and hostile environments. And they can lie dormant in your food. And the only way to get rid of them is to, as Elena said, bring them to temperatures above 240 degrees C, basically to inactivate
to answer
them.
Cheyenne's question from the chat about the likelihood of botulism with modern pressure canning, when you're following a tested recipe using an appropriate method, it's very, 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 very low, like astronomically low. These recipes have been tested so rigorously to make sure that they are safe and effective. Anytime that you see somebody who's like mentioning a news article where somebody got botulism poisoning from home canned green beans, typically these are occasions where somebody did not follow an appropriate recipe or did not process appropriately.
I would say to those of you that are out there, I'm sorry, is that there are a lot of people online. I regularly see on YouTube people demonstrating unsafe practices of pressure canning. And I sit there and think that like you are creating an environment that will just make botulism, it's like you're trying to to grow bacteria. So you do want to be careful because I think many of those people are well-intentioned, but just don't realize that what they're doing is not safe. So like what Elena's saying, it's just really critical that you're following an approved tested recipe, and which many of you can, and which you can get for free. Things like the National Center for Home Food Preservation has lots and lots and lots of recipes, and then also the University Extension. So the UC, our Master Food Preserver, our website has all kinds of recipes. There are, and other university extensions as well. So University of Georgia has a really active, Penn State, and dozens and dozens more. And all of them have lots and lots of great recipes for almost anything that you want to can. And they'll tell you how to do it safely.
And an easy way, a Google search tip for how to find those recipes is you type your search term and then type the word site, SITE, :edu, and that will restrict all the hits that you get to educational institutions sites, and typically those are agricultural extension websites and are safe.
Kirsten popped an example in the chat.
There are a lot of renegade canning groups out there on the internet, on Reddit, on Facebook, and some of the things that they promote are pretty horrifying and dangerous. Be careful.
Cheyenne had a
sorry, I was going to highlight some questions. So Shan asked if we have resources specifically for like ready to eat meals. I'm going to say National Center for Home Food Preservation and the UC has some, but if anyone else has favorite resources, University of Georgia is very active. But if anyone else has favorite resources, let me know.
I know they exist because we've done Facebook posts on that. So I know the UC, I know our website has some. We can probably look those up. And then there was actually an earlier question from Cheyenne that kind of got buried about water bath canning
Steam,
and steam
steam
canning.
canning.
Oh,
Um,
yeah,
which
I
is also a
can
great question.
talk about that.
Yeah, go ahead, but I am a big fan of steam canning.
Yeah,
so.
I love
Excellent.
steam canning. It's
Me too.
amazing. So atmospheric steam canning and water bath canning are equivalent and totally safe. That was a relatively recent update, but we're happy to say that that is now an approved method of canning. The caveat here being that an atmospheric steam canner can be used for any water bath recipe where the processing time for your altitude is less than 45 minutes. So
And the
that's the
reason for
caveat.
that is that you don't want your steam canner to boil dry. That's really the only reason.
So I use mine all the time for things like jams, jellies, relish, pickles.
It's much faster. The water comes to a boil much faster because it's so much less water in it. It's much lighter. Schlep around big pots of water.
You don't have
It's
to
easier
reach
to
in
they're
and
easier
pull
to
things.
load because so they're I got one as a Christmas present after using a neighbor's.
Actually, I know this sounds silly, but one of the things I like about mine is that where I live, we have very hard water. And the jars don't get quite so, like I always wipe them off afterwards, but the jars just seem like they don't get so much mineral deposit on them, which makes me happy in a steam canner. Steam
I
canners
didn't
are
even think
great.
about it, but now that I do, yeah, same here.
Yeah. And they're not particularly expensive. I mean, expensive is a very relative term, but steam canners can be purchased relative to other kinds of, cooking equipment under $100. So, and then another sort of shout out for steam canners is that any canning equipment you already have, like a jar lifter or the jars you're using, all that's the same. There's no additional special equipment you need to purchase once you've purchased the steam canner. All the things you already have should work just fine.
So would there be an advantage to do steam canning or pressure cooker canning with jellies and jams and acidic fruit?
So there's two things here. Atmospheric steam canning is comparable to a boiling water bath. Pressure canning is kind of a whole other beast. So pressure canning is a lot hotter. I use my atmospheric steam canner for jams and jellies because like Henry mentioned, it's quicker, it's easier to load. I don't have to haul a giant heavy pot of water onto my stove. Always my favorite things to do. But for recipes that do not need to be processed in a pressure canner, so they're high acid foods, there is no advantage to pressure canning them. You're gonna cook it heck of a lot more, processing it in a pressure canner than with a boiling water canner because of the higher temperature, for one thing. And especially in jams and jellies, it can really alter how the pectin sets up. And you likely would not end up with a jelly texture jelly at the end.
Okay, so the pressure canner is strictly for non-acidic, and the steam and the water bath are for acidic.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
What's up, Kirsten?
So we have one question sort of going back to candied citrus in the chat. Questions about recipes for candied citrus. And I know we've got some great links thanks to Nina for peel and some other things, but I know that earlier Paige was showing us whole candied or orange slices. So I'm wondering if you have recipes or resources for how to do that. And then we had more questions about steam canning, advice for avoiding siphoning when using a steam canner.
Talk about candied citrus first, Paige, or shall I? talk about the siphoning?
I was just looking up my recipe that I
Oh, okay.
use.
I'll go ahead and
So
talk about siphoning
I'll
then.
find my recipe and throw it in the chat for you. And if you wanna-
Okay.
Thanks,
So
Paige.
the advice for dealing with siphoning is going to be pretty much the same for any canning method. It's basically you need to prevent your jars from cooling down super duper rapidly. So excuse me. With a steam canner, you do want to wait about 3 minutes after you've finished the processing time, turned the heat off, and let the canner kind of cool down a little bit before you take the lid off and remove the jars. So that's going to help reduce things siphoning a reasonable amount. Then the other thing is don't put them in a super duper cold place to cool. So, I generally let jars cool kind of in my kitchen where it's a little bit warmer than the rest of the house, especially when I'm canning and have all the stove and everything going. And, I wouldn't put them in front of like an open window or anything. But other than that,
Also,
you can just let them cool naturally.
but also make sure that you're leaving the appropriate headspace for whatever you're preserving. Not too high, not too low.
So I was taught to steam can in my pressure canner, and from this discussion, I just learned that a actual steam canner exists. So is steam canning in the pressure canner not safe?
I don't think that's currently recommended. Typically, for a long time, pressure canning was also kind of referred to as steam canning. But what we're discussing here is atmospheric steam canning, so steam canning at atmospheric pressure. And generally, it's recommended to have a dedicated atmospheric steam canner.
Okay, thank you.
But I mean, if you use a pressure canner with its weight off, you essentially have a steam canner. You just have you have to make sure that you have
Yeah. Let me
a
go
constant
hunt down the
stream
National Center
of steam
page for
coming out of
this.
that vent. So that you know that you have a 100% steam atmosphere before you actually start your timing.
So it might be okay if you follow that rule.
It might be okay.
Okay.
Steam canners have been tested so that you know that the heat distribution within the canner is uniform enough that everything inside it will be at the desired temperature for the desired amount of time.
So from the National Center for Home Food Preservation, I can put this link in the chat. The research has been done on a dome-style atmospheric steam canner. So to my knowledge, there has not been research done on using a pressure canner as an atmospheric steam canner.
I think there's just too many variables with pressure canners because it kind of depends on the kind you have, and is the product you're doing, is it actually up above the water? Is it in the water? Is there enough water, like Henry said? If you're establishing, and the testing would be, there have, like Linda said, there hasn't been testing on these, and it would be difficult to do so because there are so many varieties. The dome style canners are what has been tested, and Kristen posted a photo of one. It's actually the same one I have in the chat. And they're also nice and lightweight, and they're not as big as I'm like, I have all three kinds, and the steam canners are not as bulky as most pressure canners. I know there are some small versions, but
They're thinner walled, they're lighter, they're easy to sling around. And if you're using a pressure canner as a steam canner, you still have to reach down and lift your jars out. And one of the advantages of these dome steam canners is that the jars are sitting on a shallow pan that you can just transfer them horizontally, essentially.
They're sort of on a little platform with the water underneath them. So.
Okay,
But
thank you.
And I would say for those of you out there, if you've not done either water bath canning or steam canning is great. If you're thinking about just getting into it and you're sort of deciding whether or not you want to buy a water bath canner or a steam canner. I know this is just my personal opinion, but if I could go back in time, if steam canning had been an option when I first started doing it, I don't think I ever would have gone with water bath canning. It just uses so much water.
The advantage of water bath canning is that a lot of people have a big deep stock pot that they can use to just dump some water in. Just, and you just need a pot that is deep enough where you can have a rack to set your jars on, and then have an inch to 2 inches of water above the top of your jars. And then keep in mind that you are going to be having this at a rolling boil. So make sure you leave yourself a little bit of space so you don't end up with water all over your stove.
And we have one last question probably for the evening, and it's from Lori. Are there any Master Food Preserver approved recipes for extracts, almond extract, cinnamon extract, etc.?
I don't do much with extracts, but I can go check the recipe.
I mean, Cornell Extension, Cornell University Extension has some recipes for various extracts: lavender, cinnamon, almond, other nuts, hazelnut. Can try and post that in the chat. All of them use a solvent, typically high proof ethanol, alcohol. American culinary extracts is there. I just posted the link in the chat. Yeah, they've got stuff for almond, berries, cherry, cinnamon, citrus, chocolate, coconut, coffee, hazelnut, lavender, mint, and vanilla.
I actually am a fan. I usually make anytime I can, not anytime, but I often will. I have a little I've made vanilla extract myself a few times as a gift. Like when I've gotten vanilla beans, every once in a while when you get a good deal on vanilla beans, and also things like homemade almond extract is really great in baked goods, and it can be a really fun gift to give people. But as Henry said, you have to use. I've never seen a home recipe that didn't use alcohol, so you maybe just want to take that into consideration depending on who you're giving it to. But again, commercial extracts are also an alcohol,
all an alcohol
as well. Yeah.
I have some Buddha's hand limoncello, essentially marinating down in the basement. And I was able to, Oregon actually sells 190 proof alcohol, 95% ethanol. You can't get that in California. It's actually a much better solvent for extracting things.
I'll have some high school stories about that.
Yes.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
And you dilute it down to use it once you Everclear,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes. Although actually from a baking point of view, I've made just like vanilla using just good quality bourbon to make like
Yeah.
a bourbon vanilla. And it's not the same as what you would purchase in a store. The alcohol is definitely, that alcohol flavor is definitely much more forward in a homemade version, but it does taste good and it's great for, again, baking and that sort of thing.
Yes.
When you follow the recipes like from Cornell that Henry posted, substituting in like a high quality alcohol so that that flavor actually enhances what you're making versus Everclear, which is really there just to extract the.
And if you're baking, the alcohol basically evaporates. It
Cooks out anyway, yeah.
Volatilizes, so it's gone. It's just the carrier for the oils.
But you have to drive to Oregon to get it.
We have friends in Oregon, so we go visit them. You can get high proof ethanol in California, but it's not as high. It's only 120 proof.
Do we have any last questions?
Last questions? Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Maybe I'll do as a last coordinator perspective. If anyone looking to put on events for next month and wondering if people who showed up tonight, is there an event that you'd like to see or a topic that you'd like to see us cover? And maybe for time's sake, if you could speak up rather than putting in the chat if you're comfortable. Anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak, want to share if there's an event next month put on by the online program? Is there a topic or a specialty crop that you'd like to see us cover?
I guess steam and water bath canning or not water bath, pressure canning were both brought up as something that some people are afraid of and other people have never heard of.
Okay, yeah, that's great.
We're going to be talking about water bath canning this Sunday at one of our events on making citrus preserves, sweet citrus preserves. So just before the Super Bowl.
Any other last, Patty, Cheyenne, Lori, any other last requests, suggestions for next month?
Come next month with your question.